Hi, my name is Reed Silverne. The name of this show is Fed Pride. The reason it's called Fed Pride is because I'm a federal worker and I'm proud of it. No, my agency or no other agency of the federal government has reviewed what I'm about to say. Uh, Nothing that I'm about to say has been okayed by a public affairs officer, and one of the main reasons is even I don't know what I'm about to say. Today I'm going to talk about a number of things, but I'd like to start out with a federal issue from the Federal Employees News Digest, an excellent newsletter that I encourage federal workers to get or to try to get a hold of, because there's a lot of information in it that really can affect you, and you can find out about things that are being done and do affect the federal worker before, not after, it's passed Congress and it's the law and you're stuck with it. And one of the things that's coming up is a bill called Civil Service Reform Bill. It's H.R. 3841. And 3841 basically says that, first of all, we're going to make it easier to fire you. And secondly, we're going to make it harder for seniority to help you keep from getting riffed. And as federal employees know, the phrase RIF means a reduction in force, which is federalese for downsizing. You're laid off, you're fired, get out of here. We've had it with you. And basically, right now, the rule is the RIF rules have been adjusted for for performance as well as seniority, and has basically two edges. The first group are veterans who are basically, for all intents and purposes, sacrosanct. If they have more than 3 years in, they are on their own retention register that's up above everybody else. And then come the non-vets. Well, disabled veterans is actually the top, veterans is second, and then come the non-vets who are in their own retention register. And once you're in a retention register, you get your seniority points. If you've worked for the government for 15 years, you get credit for 15 years. And then we in the federal government have a rating system: 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 5 is excellent. 4 is exceeds fully successful. 3 is fully successful. 2 is basically needs work. I don't know what the official word for it is. And 1 is you're out of here. Poor, I think it is, and then you're out of here. And 1 is failure to perform. And if you get credit for 3, they take the last 3 years. If you have 3s all those last 3 years, naturally you can't be laid off because you're fully successful and you're performing just fine, according to your supervisor. But you get 12 years that's added to your 15 years of retention, and your number of years on hand that's credited toward your RIF is 27 years. So you end up with 27 years seniority. Now, if the guy next to you has worked for the government 1 year less than you, and he only has 14 years in, but he exceeds fully successful for all 3 of those previous years, he ends up with 16 years of credit to be added to his 14 years. So he gets 30 years. So they're trying to figure out who is going to be downsized and laid off, and who's going to bump who. He has 30 years credit on his record. You have only 27 years. So even though you have a year seniority on the other guy, his excellent performance has already caused him to outrank you. And that's how the system works right now. Well, this particular proposal is going to make it that much more important, because instead of just 4 years credit, they're going to give 7 years credit for the exceeds fully successful and 10 years extra credit for the excellent. Now, that might be great, and I can understand that they're trying to take the government service, they're trying to make it more like private industry. But basically in private industry, anybody can pretty much summarily fire anybody else. Of course, if they do, they might be caught with a wrongful termination suit, but they can do that. And in the government, works pretty much the same way, except that they have to follow all these rules in order to set up who gets downsized and in what order through the combination of seniority and performance. Well, what this one is going to do is give a big advantage to the guy who just happens to be in good with his supervisor, and human nature being what it is, that happens in the government just the way it happens in private industry. Now, some people might think that's a good thing. Some people might think, well, always performance is going to be the only medium that any supervisor is going to use in order to fairly evaluate the performance of his subordinates. And you're welcome to believe that, and I really appreciate somebody who believes the best in human nature. And I believe that for the most part, most government supervisors are pretty honest people, and they evaluate as honestly as they can. And of course, there's an exception everywhere, just like in private industry. And in that case, if this law passes, it's going to be a tremendous advantage that some people are going to have over other people. So by virtually doubling, and as far as the excellent rating, more than doubling the credit and the performance that credit that a person is going to get, is going to just kind of throw the seniority factor of the equation kind of out of whack completely. Now, the unions are against it, and I have to give whoever put it together credit for trying, but I'm not sure that that particular rule is going to be handled perfectly and completely fairly everywhere by every agency and in every place in the whole government. So I think that right now there is performance, and performance is evaluated into that equation, and an advantage of 4 to 8 years between the average fully successful performer and the excellent performer, getting an 8-year edge on seniority over the average performer. I think that definitely gives performance an edge, and I think that that's enough, to be honest with you. We give them that much more, 17 years, 7 and then an extra 10. I'm not sure that that's going to work, and I'm going to have to see how that comes off. Now, I may not have understood completely what this rule is, but I think that there is a problem over there. The other thing is that right now, if you have a poor performer, and any supervisor out there I sympathize with, because they're out there, and they are irritating, and the taxpayer has a good reason to be angry with them. And poor performer is given what they call a PIP, Personnel Improvement Program, or Performance Improvement Plan is what that's called. And he's given so many months to improve specific things about his performance, or he's in deep trouble. And basically, one of the problems is that you can go through this performance improvement plan, he can fail, then he can fail again, then he can fail again, and the rule is kind of loose as to exactly when you can then terminate the guy. Now, I have seen situations where poor performers have been terminated out of the government. And so it's, this whole thing that it's impossible to get rid of a poor performer or somebody who's been in the government for past a probation period, that's not true. I mean, they can get rid of them. But it is a painful procedure, and more often than not, those people are going to protest and protest and protest, and there are a lot of sources of protest against it. But this rule is going to get one chance and you're out. And again, then you have the other side, and you have a situation where you're out without any appeal. What's going to happen then, and what happens when you have a bad egg on the supervisory side, who's just, doesn't like the look of one person's face and finds everything he does to be inadequate or not up to his standards, when somebody else over here, when everything that person does might be more than adequate and magnificent and always up to his standards. So that kind of thing really puts things just gives the supervisor almost absolute authority in that particular situation, and I'm not sure that they need to change the rules that much. I do understand the frustration of government supervisors, and I really think some of that they could rewrite and tighten up the rules and make these performance improvement plans specific and have a specific set of responses, and maybe the supervisor up above them to watch it and see whether the performance improvement plan is meetable and whether anybody could achieve it, or whether this person over here who's a poor performer in the supervisor's eyes might be a good performer in everybody else's eyes, and sometimes that happens too. But the whole thing is very, very shaky, and it's very, very hard to get into these performance issues and into these kind of situations, say, and second guess a supervisor or second guess an employee and second guess the whole system. But just to go in there and say we're going to have no system, you got one chance to straighten up or you're out of here, and basically put the government on the same circumstance that private industry is. And anybody who's been following what's been going on in private industry just sees thousands and thousands and thousands of lawsuits and so on and so forth that don't really exist in the government, because the government doesn't necessarily allow itself to be sued. I'm just not sure that just saying let's throw the whole system out, let's go out there and just give total power over to one side is the way to go. I think we have to negotiate between the management and the employees, management and the unions, if there are unions in an organization, and try to work out a reasonable method that's going to weed out the poor performers and at the same time allow the supervisors and management enough leeway to be able to run an organization and to keep everything going. But this is something I'm going to watch, and I'm sure there's people out there that just think that H.R. 3841 is the best thing since sliced bread, and there are other people out there who just think it's the most evil thing since the beginning of time. But you out there are hearing that this is going through Congress, and this is being considered, and that's part of what FedPride is all about, to know what's going on if you're a federal worker. Okay, there's been so much that's occurred in the last week. Congress ended a session, and they just passed things left and right. Major changes to major laws that affect the way the federal government works and the way the federal government affects the people and each other and everything else. And among the things that were passed is a major overhaul to the welfare system, virtually throughout what we call welfare now, which is aid to families with dependent children, and replaced it with a whole new system. And in the same week, they passed the minimum wage bill, and I've been talking a lot about increasing minimum wage, and that I agree that it's necessary to do, and that the Republican opposition to it at the time just seemed kind of self-defeating and made them look hard-hearted when they really didn't need to. And sure enough, the Republicans went in there and passed a minimum wage bill that increased the minimum wage by 90 cents over 2 years, and then gave $23 billion worth of tax breaks to small business to try to help them be able to cover it. Among the tax breaks were tax breaks for depreciation, quicker write-offs, IRAs, and a whole bunch of other things. But keep that $23 billion in mind, because that somewhat offsets the other bill, which was the welfare bill, which saved $55 billion. So when you add up the whole week, really there's only been a savings of $32 billion in this whole big area. And then health insurance, an absolutely vital and tremendously important change to the health insurance system, was the health insurance bill that just passed and is going to be signed by the president. And that basically, it's called the Kennedy-Kassebaum bill, and it basically makes health insurance transferable from one job to the other. The next health insurance company, from the company that you go to work for, can't deny you, if you've been at least 12 months under that plan, for pre-existing conditions. So if you have a problem, or if somebody in your family that's covered has cancer or arthritis, or maybe your children have a chronic childhood disease, people in that circumstances were scared to death and unable to leave their job. They lost all their job mobility, the chance, as the Constitution says, to pursue happiness, because they were afraid, and for good reason, they would be dropped from health insurance. They would never be able to get affordable health insurance again. And of course, companies were afraid to hire people with pre-existing conditions because they might lose their health insurance. So it was a terrible situation, and a lot of people did, either change their jobs and lost their insurance and were unable to be insured by the company, or just lost their health insurance completely, or were stuck in dead-end jobs and unable to move, unable to do what they needed to do to pursue happiness in life. And now they are. However, all these things, whenever there is legislation, and legislation that has a deep and important impact on the future, there's always going to be unintended consequences. And in my opinion, I think that portability is a very, very interesting situation, because if there is portability, and insurance companies know that when the first time they insure a new employee, you could be a brand new employee for the first time going out to work for McDonald's or to Kmart, and that Kmart looks at you and brings you in, and you work there 6 months and you qualify for health insurance, they're basically setting you up for insurance for the entire rest of your life. And at the same time, there's tremendous research going on in genetics, which basically, when the human genome is completely solved, and they're going to know the genetic content that's going to predict who's going to get breast cancer, who has a tendency to get prostate cancer, who has a tendency to get muscular dystrophy, and all these other diseases, Alzheimer's disease, and 1,000 other diseases. And they'll be able to take a sample of your blood in 10, 20, 30 years, and within so many percent predict what your lifetime medical cost is going to be. And it's going to be very, very interesting now that there's portability with all these technologies about medical records and medical insurance coming up and being exchanged, and databases being put together, whether they're going to deny people who are healthy at 18 years old sooner or later. And even if they're not doing that now. And whether insurance companies are going to be able to ask you for a drop of your blood or a snip of your hair and be able to unlock your genome and take a look at your genetic structure and see whether you have a tendency toward cancer, whether you have a tendency toward leukemia, whether you have a tendency toward heart disease, and everything else, calculated out with whatever your vices happen to be, smoking, drinking, and so on and so forth, driving too fast, and all the other statistical additions and factors that go into the whole thing, and say, look, this 18-year-old kid here who's working, who's going to enter this minimum wage job at now $5.15 an hour, he's going to cost me $353,467 by the time he dies. And I can't get rid of him. Or at least the insurance company who's insuring that particular company is going to be thinking, I can't get rid of him. So it may ultimately, in the long run, over 5, 10, 15, 20 years of improvements in technology, create an entire class of people that are uninsurable from birth. And not only them, but any member of their family. I mean, if they marry, you have a healthy person, and he's 18 years old, and he goes to work for Kmart, and he decides to marry somebody who has leukemia in their family, and whose potential lifetime medical bill is going to be $1 million instead of $50,000. That is a real problem. And I don't think anybody's looking forward that much. But I think portability is the first step toward a situation where people may be cherry-picked, not at various times in their life or every time they change a job, which is what the insurance companies do now, but cherry-picked basically from their first entry-level job and first exposure to insurance. Now, who knows? Maybe someday they might say, well, if you're a child and you're under your parents' insurance, then the first company can't deny you pre-existing conditions. And I'm sure the insurance companies would love to deny. In fact, there are cases where they've already denied people for not pre-existing conditions, but for potential existing conditions. And there are cases of people with Huntington's disease in their family, which is genetic, indicates a genetic predisposition toward a terrible disease that disables people and causes a lot of expense, where they were denied just because some member of their family had Huntington's disease. And so I think that you're going to see, maybe not this year, maybe not next year, maybe not the year after, but eventually, as this technology grows, you're going to see a big problem with people being uninsurable from birth. And I think that's something that people should pay attention to. Then there's the welfare bill. And the welfare bill had a number of different aspects to it. One is people on welfare, women mostly with young children, can only stay on welfare for 2 years. And after 2 years, if they don't get a job, they're off. If they go on and off and on and off of welfare, they have a lifetime limit of 5 years. And however, they have an exception for the 20% hardship cases. State can declare 20% hardcore long-term and go over the 5-year limit on that. There's also a $2 billion fund that's set aside for recessions. And I'm not sure that's going to cover all the increased privation and trouble and problems of people going over that limit during recessions. I mean, even for unemployment is usually 13 weeks. It can go 26, 39 weeks. It can be extended over and over again during recessions. And I assume that they gave the states this 20% leeway because they wanted to cover that. Illegal or legal immigrants would be denied the ability to get on welfare at all. And I think one of the unintended consequences of that might be an increase in citizenship applications. So there may be millions and millions of more citizens, in these various groups as a result of this. States have to provide Medicaid for anyone who qualifies under current law, so they're not messing around with the Medicaid. Food stamps would be limited for able-bodied adults. You wouldn't have the extent of food stamps that they have now. So homeless living under the underpass might have their food stamps cut off. And so there's a number of different things that are involved here, and it's very, very hard to say. I think one of the real ironies of the whole thing is Clinton is out here grabbing the Republican issues and signing this welfare bill, and here you have the Republicans voting for the minimum wage. It sounds like both sides are trying to pass anything that's popular right now, and without really taking a look, stepping back and seeing what the ultimate results are going to be one way or the other. Well, I'm going to have a lot more to say about these by next week. Everybody's going to forget that Congress passed any of these things, and I'm not going to, and I'll still have a lot more comments. My name is Reed Silverne. The name of the show is Fed Pride. The reason it's called Fed Pride is because I'm a federal worker and proud of it, and I hope that to see you next week. Thank you very much.